Okay, so this is another video on word order, specifically on the word order of subject questions, which are a special type of question. Before you watch this video, you need to watch the video on the word order of regular questions, the Quazvo video. And you should also watch the video on the word order of statements, the SVO video. There's another video on indirect questions or embedded questions, and they're very similar to subject questions, so watching that video can also be helpful. You might want to compare the two. So first of all, a little review very quickly. What is Quazvo? This is the acronym that we use for helping students remember the order of a question in English. And we tell them it's the order of all questions in English, but we're about to see some exceptions. So that's question words, what, who, what time, how often, etc. Any auxiliary from the verb phrase, the first auxiliary from the verb phrase, the subject, then the rest of the verb phrase, and if there is an object or a complement, a prepositional phrase, whatever, the rest of the sentence normally comes at the end. So here's a few examples, very similar to the video on Quazvo. We've seen similar examples to these. I've got 4 WH questions, and I've got 2 yes or no questions. There are a variety of verb tenses here. Note that the second and fourth example are in simple tenses, and that's going to be very important. We'll see in a second. Where the auxiliary is do, does, or did, and the main verb is always going to be the base verb, regardless of the subject. What I really want to focus on, though, are those 2 columns, the auxiliary column. Remember, whatever appears here has an effect on this column. Now, remember, the first example is with the verb to be in the simple present, and remember, the verb to be acts as its own auxiliary even when it's the main verb. That's why there's nothing in that column, the second one. But you'll see all the other verbs in the column take their form because of what appears in the auxiliary column. Who does she want to call? Want must be the base verb because we're using the simple present. We have the next one is in the continuous. So my auxiliary is the verb to be. The main verb is ing. Fourth one, why did you do that? Simple past. Again, it's a simple tense, so the main verb has to be the base form. And then the last 2, those 2 yes or no questions, I've got a present perfect, where the auxiliary is has or have. The main verb is a participle, a past participle. And then a modal, should. And just like simple tenses, modals always take a base verb in the verb column. So again, this is just a review of the Quazvo video, just quickly going over that again. What's going to happen is you're going to teach this to your students, and they're going to get a pretty good grasp of Quazvo. And then there's going to be some questions that don't seem to make sense. So look at this one here. Who wants some? Your student might look at this and then plug it into the Quazvo columns, and it looks like this. And at first glance, it doesn't seem to make any sense. And you might even think, is that grammatically correct? And it is, but it's what's called a subject question. Compare it with a question like this. In the first one, who wants some, is a subject question. We use subject questions because the answer we want is the subject. We don't know the subject. The answer is going to give us the doer, the agent of the action. We're trying to elicit that. The second question we see here is trying to elicit the object. We know the subject. We know she. We want to know the person she's going to call. That's actually the object. Subject questions are not as common, so your students are going to be more accustomed to forming questions like the second one, where we require an auxiliary, we know the subject, and what's going to happen is your students might try to make a question like this. Who does want some, or who does she want some, which is just completely wrong, but they're trying to follow the rules of a regular Quazvo question. They think, I need an auxiliary, do or does, and that means that my main verb has to be the base form. They're not accustomed to having wants in the main verb form. But what happens with subject questions, they're a big exception to the Quazvo rule. They don't follow Quazvo, they actually follow the order of a statement. They're just like a SVO statement, except that they begin with question words, where really the question word is the subject. It's asking about the subject. So then there's no subject column later, and the auxiliary and the main verb are together. I'm going to leave the column in the middle just so you can see and compare with what would normally go in that space. But really now we just have a whole verb phrase back together, not separated by the subject. It takes the statement form. Here's another example in the simple past. What happened? So again, there's no auxiliary, and what your students might try to do is stick a did in there, thinking, well, all of my questions in the past require did. But we can't do this. Now, this is really the only place that your students are going to get really tripped up in the simple past and the simple present. Because in any other verb tense, it's not really going to make a big difference. We don't remove these auxiliaries. For example, who's hungry? The verb to be is going to be there always. It's my main verb, it's the auxiliary, it's the verb to be. The only thing we're missing is a subject, and that's not really that confusing for your students. So this is not going to make a big deal. Neither is a continuous or a more complex verb tense, like I have a present continuous and the present perfect continuous here. Same thing with a past perfect, anything with a modal. It's not really going to change much. There's just no subject in the middle. What we need to keep in mind are those first two examples, that when a simple past or simple present sentence takes the form of a statement, it does not require an auxiliary anymore, and the main verb is going to be conjugated.